Nora?
Okay, just give me a minute. Comadres, it's time for Comadres Kitchen with Lola Wiarco. This is so exciting for us. I'm not a cook, but I tell you what, I love looking at the pictures, and I even get a little interested in possibly going into the kitchen. So it's very, very exciting to be here with you and to have you joining us today. And thank you so much, Comadre Lola, for doing this for us. And she has an assistant, her sister Elise, and she'll tell us a lot more about herself. I'm just briefly going to introduce you, and then maybe Elise will make a few comments, and then Dolores will take it over. But I also want to thank Comadre Maria Ferrer. She does a huge amount of work for everything that we do. Maria is the linchpin around which things happen. Thank you, Comadre Maria, for all that you do. So, a very brief bio on Lola Wiarco Dweck. Lola is a Mexican-American recipe developer. She's also a writer and a cooking instructor who loves sharing her culture with the world. Growing up in California and spending summers in Mexico, Lola celebrates her family's rich culinary traditions and vibrant culture through Lola's Cocina. Comadres, take it away.
Thank you, comadre. Yes, like Nora said, my name is Lola Dweck, and I currently live in Highlands Beach, Colorado, originally from California. I'm the writer, recipe developer, and founder of Lola's Cocina, which is a food and travel blog. My sister Elise is joining us from Las Vegas. She's a Las Vegas comadre. She's going to be moderating today and dropping in some fun facts and asking questions for prizes that are going to be given away from Lola's Mercadito, my online shop. So make sure you're listening, tuning into everything that we're saying, because it might be a question so that you can win a prize. Did you need to say anything, Elise, before we get started?
Just a few ground rules we wanted to set. First and foremost, if you could please mute yourselves, but this is an engaging discussion. So if you have any questions, comments, you can put them in the chat and we'll read them as we see them. And we'll also be putting the questions in the chat for the prizes, and the first person to respond will be the winner. And if you could shoot me over your email address in a private message, we'll get the prize over to you. Thank you.
Okay, so today I'm not sure if the boxes are pinned, or because I have a vision of everyone. Okay,
you're pinned.
Okay, perfect. So everyone sees what this is. So today we're going to be making 3 different salsas, and like I mentioned in the invite, the 3 main techniques to making salsas and sauces in Mexico, or Mexican salsas and sauces, are roasting, toasting, and boiling, and we're going to actually be doing 2 of those. We're not going to be roasting right now because the salsas that I'm making don't require roasting, but they can be, you can do a variation on any of these and roast the ingredients, and they're going to be tasty too. So one of the salsas we're going to be making is one that a lot of people in my family, they really love. It's called waka salsa, guacamole salsa. It has a lot of different names. And it's made with all fresh ingredients. Even someone who has absolutely no cooking experience can make it, because you don't have to cook anything. You don't have to roast anything. It's all fresh. The main ingredients for this one are tomatillos, which are not just under-ripened red tomatoes. It's a completely different fruit because it has seeds. And if you've never seen one, they come in these husks. You need to peel the husks off, rinse them because they're pretty sticky. And yeah, so these are tomatillos, onion, garlic. I use serrano peppers because they have a little bit more kick than jalapenos. And you can just do this at the gusto. You can start with 1 at a time to see how spicy you like it. I put 5, and it just depends on, sometimes you get serranos that are really spicy, sometimes you get ones that are not. If you know that you don't like heat, or you're making it for family and nobody really likes heat, I would say to start with jalapenos because they're a lot more mild. And just always taste as you go. Add 1, blend, add the next one. My salsas always taste a lot spicier when I make them. And then once they've had time to sit, or you start eating them with chips, they're not as spicy anymore. So always keep that in mind. And then the key ingredient that makes this salsa creamy is avocado. I use one to blend it. You can use one or two to blend into the salsa, or you can save one and garnish with it. If you're going to be eating it with chips, I like to do that, just cubed. And then cilantro. So it's all super fresh, super green ingredients, a little bit of olive oil and a little bit of salt. But I learned this recipe from my cousin Rodrigo, who's from Mexico City. He says that he called it guacamole. He actually uses Nor Suiza, but I try to stay away from, chicken bouillon, and I use salt, but it does give it an interesting, good flavor if you're into that. The second salsa we're going to be making is one that is one of the most beloved in our family. We just call it the GLC, the Grandma Lola salsa, but on my website it's called chile japonés salsa. There's kind of a debate in our family because for a while people were unclear on whether it was made with chile japonés or chile de árbol, which they look very similar. This is chile de árbol, this is chile japonés. You can see one is shorter. The japonés is a little bit smaller and wider than the árbol chili peppers. These are longer. And typically when you're buying them, the árbol chili is sold with a stem, and the japonés comes with no stem. In terms of heat level, I read that they're both similar. They have similar heat, but I find that japonés is a little bit more mild than the árbol chili. So this one requires super simple ingredients that if you have them on hand, you can always whip up a really good salsa. Garlic, 2 cloves of garlic, chile japonés, salt, and this is a full can, but I'm not sure how much we're going to be using. We'll see when we blend up the salsa. Of canned tomato sauce. My grandma Lola always used to, for some reason, always used to say that we had to use generic, the store brand tomato sauce, not any name brand. I'm not sure if that's because it was less expensive or because she liked the flavor, but we always go with the off-brand tomato sauce for this recipe. And then the third one, we're going to be boiling ingredients. I use either yellow cherry tomatoes or the yellow grape tomatoes. I had those growing in my garden one year, and I had so many that I didn't know what to do with them. So I made a spin of one of my other salsas. I call it the tangy tomatillo salsa, which I make with vinegar. That salsa we use for barbacoa tacos. I love it because it keeps really well in the refrigerator because of the vinegar and the salt in it. And if you want a little spin, I'm making, this one is called my spicy golden salsa. It has a little tiny hint of sweetness because the tomatoes, but it definitely has kick from the chile de árbol peppers that I just described to you, not the chile japonés, which if you are at home and you want to make one of these, you can use the chiles interchangeably. Don't run out to the store just to get one if you have the other chile. It's going to give it a little different spin, but it'll still be really good. And then I use white distilled vinegar for this one, which is what gives it its longer shelf life, and salt. And just a little note on salt, I always use the Diamond kosher salt. So my recipes, you want to taste as you go, because I am comfortable cooking with this specific salt. If you use Himalayan sea salt, if you're using the Morton kosher salt, or if you're using just regular table salt, you would want to taste, because I might, 1 tablespoon or 1 teaspoon of one is gonna either make it not salty enough or super salty if you're using a different type of salt. So all of my recipes, I use this type of salt. I like it for cooking and even for kind of seasoning stuff. So if you want to just type in the chat which salsa you want to start with, and we can get started on that one.
And Lola, if we can pause briefly, you mentioned something about substitutions with the chilies, and Nora had a great question. She asked, does the kind of onion you use matter?
For this salsa, I don't think it does. I use white onion, but I've also used green onion, yellow onion. The only onion that I wouldn't use for any of these salsas is the yellow sweet onion, because that's going to give a different flavor. But definitely, I like salsas because you can use what you have on hand. If you have jalapenos, use jalapenos. If you have güeritos, use those. Don't make this trip to the store just to get one specific ingredient if you have everything else. So yeah, no, I've made this with, in place of half of a white onion, I've used 1 bunch of green onions, and I just chop off the very tips of the greens. I use most of the green and then the white part. and the salsa comes out delicious too. So yeah, that's a good question. I love when people ask questions, so don't feel that you're interrupting. Keep them coming. So did people say which one they want to start with?
If people have spoken, if we can start with the waka salsa, please.
Okay, waka salsa is a really good one. Beginner level salsa. It requires ingredients that you can find at, I would say, every grocery store, because I can find them here in the suburbs of Denver. I don't have to drive into Denver to get my ingredients. My regular King Superstore has tomatillos. And like I mentioned, it requires no cooking, no boiling, no toasting, no roasting. So it's super easy to make.
It's
The
a
one-
beginner level skill set for professional level taste.
Yes, exactly. The one tool that I find essential when making salsas, which you go to Mexico and you see old school blenders that are making delicious salsas, you can use any type of blender, but I love having a heavy duty blender because you don't have to work in batches so much. But if you have a smaller blender that's not as powerful, all you're gonna have to do is make a little bit at a time and make sure it's blending. You might have to add a little bit of water to get that blender going. But so the first thing I do is take off the husks of my tomatillos and rinse them. And then I cut them in half, because if you have a different blender, you might want to cut them into fourths just to make it a little easier to blend. I'm gonna switch out my blender real quick. So I put all fresh ingredients into the blender, starting with your tomatillos. And when you're picking tomatillos, you want to pick ones that are a nice green color, not yellow. Some of them get a little funky and yellow. And this one you can see has a little brown spot on it. So I'm just going to cut that off. You don't have to get rid of the whole tomatillo.
Does size matter, Lola?
Size, I have the recipe written, I believe, in pounds. So it's about a pound of tomatillos, which is equivalent to 8 to 10. And I've ordered, sometimes I do my grocery pickup and they bring me 10 and they're the size of a grape. I'm thinking, okay, this is, yeah, I probably needed 20 of these. So if they're just a normal, I would say the size of a tangerine, you could use 10 of these. And if they're really big, because sometimes you see huge tomatillos also, then you're going to use maybe 6 to 7. And if, yeah, so yeah, someone asked also if they can use purple tomatillos, which they sell at my mom lives near a really cool farm store, and they have the little tiny purple tomatillos, which I've made tomatillo and salsa verde with tomatillo salsa verde, the fresh one with those, and it comes out really good also. You just need more of them. And it gives it a tiny bit different flavor because the purple tomatillos are a little sweeter, less tangy and acidic. And yeah, but it's still going to be a really good tomatillo salsa. So you're going to see, this is going to make a really big batch of salsa, but it's also one that, I mean, I have some salsas that you just had a drop of it and it is potent, it's spicy. This one is one that you can eat with chips, scoop it up. When you're putting it on your tacos, you're gonna put a lot. So you're making a big batch of it, but that's okay because you eat a lot of it at a time.
And we had a question come in from Julia, Lola. Do you leave the seeds in the tomatillo?
Yes, the seeds are super tiny, probably even smaller than tomato seeds. So it would be really hard to remove the seeds. And there's no need to remove them either. So the tomatillos are all in, and you can always half this batch. You can double it if you know I've made a huge double batch of this, which fills a whole bowl and it finishes at party. So whenever I use garlic in a recipe, we always say dale el golpe to get out all the oils and the fragrance and the flavor. So that's an easy way to kill it too, by smashing it with either a knife or I have this little wooden thing. So there's 2 cloves of garlic, and this is a pretty big onion. So I'm going to use probably, let me see, about 1/3 of it. My recipe calls for half. So I'll use the small half of this. And this is the salsa that one of my friends said she had a lot left over, so she marinated a whole chicken with it, and that the chicken came out really good. Also the one that I said my neighbor makes for a veggie dip and her kids eat it. And then let's see, I'm gonna add the 5 chiles because I know the spice level that I like, but like I said, taste as you go, blend, taste, blend, taste. Hopefully these are not super hot. And even if they are, it's a big batch, so it'll get tamed down. And I like to blend all of my fresh ingredients first before I add the avocado so that you can see the difference in the texture. I'm gonna add my olive oil, about a tablespoon of olive oil.
Do you have a preference for olive oil, Lola?
You can use whatever you have on hand, extra virgin. Yeah, I usually use extra virgin, but again, don't go to the store just to get extra virgin if you have regular. And then I just add a tiny bit of water to get the blender going. Not too much because you don't want to water this down more than necessary. And then I'm going to add my salt right now too. So I'm going to mute myself to blend this quickly.
While she blends that, we'll share some fun facts. And as Lola mentioned, you want to pay attention because we'll do pop quizzes throughout the class. And the first person to respond to the questions will earn a prize from Lola's Mercadito. Lola and I listened to Hungry for History, the podcast by Evelyn Goria and Maite, I don't remember her last name, but she had an episode specific to chilies. And one interesting fun fact that we learned from that is that chilies originated from Bolivia. At the start of the podcast, they mentioned that they were from Mexico, but as she went through the discussion, she actually must have fact-checked herself and noted that they originally came from Bolivia and that likely, or they believe that the seeds were probably carried by birds and dropped into Mexico. And now Mexico is one of the largest exporters in the world of chili.
I thought that was interesting. They said that a bird or something must have taken the seeds to Mexico, and that's why there's in such abundance. And now the chiles from all over the world originated from that specific area. Okay, so now the one ingredient I forgot to add was my cilantro. So I'm gonna add that right now along with my avocado. You see it's already looking kind of creamy, but it gets extra creamy with the avocado.
Sometimes my cilantro gets mangled at the bottom of the blender. Do you have ways or tips or tricks to avoid that?
I just chopped it a little. I leave the stem, most of the stem on because the stems have a lot of flavor, but I chopped it into smaller little bunches because I find that when I leave it in a whole bunch, it gets stuck either at the top or at the bottom. So I would try, you don't have to chop it completely, but just a little. And then I'm gonna add an avocado. Let's see. And you'll see how it gets creamy. I'm gonna leave that one just to show you how I would garnish this salsa. Avocado is really pretty and green. If you have a funky avocado that already smells weird and is turning brown, don't use it because you're gonna ruin the flavor of anything you're making, actually.
I noticed you checked the little tip when you pulled it off. What was that about?
I had read that when you pull off the tip and it's a bright green, then your avocado is ready. And if it is already brown, that it's ya se pasó. It's already past too soft.
And what about in terms of like firmness?
I like them pretty firm enough to, you saw how easy it was to slice open. It still has a good amount of firmness to it. So yeah, I prefer them a little bit firmer than soft. Once they're mushy, forget it. I don't even like the flavor of those. Okay, so I added that and I'm gonna blend for a second more. I'll mute myself again.
So another fun fact from that podcast, and we'll drop the link of the podcast into the chat too, was that chilies are actually berries. I didn't know whether they'd be considered fruit or vegetables, but it's from the berry family, which I thought was interesting. And that an ancient technique for punishing children was to burn chilies, like roast them on a comal and then have the kids inhale the smoke that they start coughing. I don't know if that would apply these days. Might have CPS called on us, but I thought that was interesting.
Oh yeah, about the kids as a
Mhm.
form of punishment.
Mhm.
Well, one time my little brother was, he went to a babysitter that used to cuss a lot in Spanish, so he started cussing, and he got in trouble. And my dad put a jalapeno on his lips to get him to stop cussing. And then my dad realized how hot he tasted it because my little brother's lips just got really swollen, and he was crying for a long time. And then my dad tasted the jalapeno. Usually they're not spicy, but he got a really spicy one. But I think my little brother learned not to cuss anymore after that. Okay, so now you can see it's super creamy. I am going to put it in a salsa bowl to show you how I would serve it if I were having guests over. And I would make chips. If you have access to really good corn tortilla chips, buy them. But out here, I don't. So I make them from scratch just by frying corn tortillas. And then, let's see. I'd probably just use half of this avocado. Looks beautiful. To cube it, here's a little trick. Slice, but not all the way through. You don't want to cut your hand, and you don't want to cut through the skin. You're just going to cut softly through till you touch the end of the avocado. Slice all the way down, and then you're going to slice all the way across. And then get a big enough spoon that is thin. Like it's not a super thick spoon, so that you can get as close to possible as between the avocado and the peel. Scoop out all the little cubes. Make sure you don't get the little belly button part. And then you can just sprinkle some of these cubes on top. Put maybe a little corn tortilla chip on it so that people know this is, you know, for chips. I'll show you what it looks like right now. And then here's my. And then if you happen to have a grocery store that sells edible flowers, usually not Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, and what's the other one? Sprouts. So they'll have little, where they sell the herbs in the little package in the refrigerated section, sometimes they'll have edible flowers. So this is totally extra only because I had them growing in my garden outside. Did I think to add some of these? So then, let's see, this is the angle where you can't see, yes, you can see it here, right? Here's this.
Perfect.
Beautiful salsa ready.
Maybe tip it just a little, Lola. Tip it so that we can see it
Let me see.
a little better.
And actually, I didn't taste this one. Let me see. It's really good. This one has good spice. But yes, like I said, always taste as you go to make sure you have enough salt. You can always add more salt, and you can always add more spice. Remember that. You don't want to add too much spice. I've taught a class where we're making a mole with chipotle and almonds, and we're supposed to add one chipotle at a time, but the person who was kind of leading that group put the whole can of chipotles, and the mole was so spicy that very few people could even handle the heat level in it. So you can always start with one at a time. Always start with a teaspoon at a time of salt. This one, because I've already made it so many times, I know that I use a tablespoon, but remember what I said, if you're using a different type of salt, start with a teaspoon, taste, add another teaspoon. And sometimes it takes a bit more because this was a really big batch of salsa. So, I mean, some of them I'm surprised when they require more than a tablespoon of salt. So that's your guacamole salsa, guaca salsa. Super easy to make.
Pause 1 sec for a couple of questions. The first question that came in from Lourdes is, wow, why olive oil? Why did we add olive oil to this
Olive
recipe.
oil, I think, is another ingredient that adds a little bit of creaminess to this salsa. It's the way my cousin made it from Mexico City. So I've always just followed his recipe. He never really, he just kind of put ingredients together. That's the way he's always made it. And yeah, I think it's just a good way to add another good fat to your salsa, aside from the avocado. It's not gonna make or break your salsa. There have been times where I forget altogether to add my olive oil and it still comes out delicious, but I feel like it's just another little level of texture that makes it really beautiful and creamy. So you can see, you might be able to see better from this angle, the texture of the salsa. It shouldn't be clumpy. It shouldn't look like a tomatillo salsa with the seeds, the ones that are cooked. It should be more of a creamy texture. Kind of like that green goddess dressing that people are into, that kind of texture. Okay, so next I'm going to start, let's see, I think I'm gonna start the yellow one, but while the tomatoes are boiling, I don't want to be jumping all over the place, but the tangy tomatillo salsa, the golden salsa, which we make with these yellow tomatoes, chile de árbol, vinegar, and salt, requires, I'll just stick to this one, I rinsed these tomatoes. I'm going to drop them in this water that I already have. I already started to boil it, but let me pull it over here. I'm going to put the tomatillos, not the tomatillos. I make this one with tomatillos also, but it comes out really good with these. So the tomatoes are going to go in here. And it doesn't require a lot of boiling because you don't want the tomatoes to get too soft. You don't want them to start exploding. That's the same rule with tomatillos. You don't want them to turn into mush while they're boiling. Just soft enough to get the raw tomato flavor out of it, and ready to blend into a delicious salsa. So when you're boiling tomatoes, you want to put enough water to cover your tomatoes. I have my heat on high. Actually, I'm going to use this one because it's a little bigger. I have my heat on medium high. Let that come to a boil. And while that is coming to a boil, I'm going to start toasting my árbol chili peppers on my comal. For those if you don't have a comal, you can always use, this is a comal, it's really thin metal. So it toasts pretty quickly, it gets hot, cast iron. But if you don't have a comal, use a sartén, just a regular pan, use whatever you have that's flat that you can heat up on the stove. I usually keep it on a medium to high heat also, but keep in mind this is a thin comal, so you want to keep an eye on your chiles. You don't want to have your heat on too high because they can burn really quickly. So this part, if you are not comfortable on working with a comal, working with your hands, you can always use tongs to move the chiles, or a little, tongs or whatever you feel comfortable with, but they don't get super hot. You're just putting them on here to bring out the fragrance and to slightly toast them. And this is a step that is, there's some Mexican recipes like I've seen where people just kind of brush the chile on an open flame, which essentially does the same thing. You just kind of brush it through like that but these are so little that I would only do that if I'm using bigger chiles like guajillo or ones like that where you're not going to burn your fingers in that process.
Lola, do you salt the water for the tomatillo?
No, these are yellow tomatoes and I don't salt the water. I salt everything once I start blending it.
And for the other salsas, going back to that really quick, a couple questions on the salt. Can you do without salt? And have you ever used new salt, which is a potassium chloride?
Ooh, no, I haven't used that. I haven't used new salt, and I've never made it without salt. It's still very flavorful because of the ingredients that are fresh and flavorful. It's going to be a tasty salsa, but salt does add a little something to everything. That's why I don't, for anyone who is into history, and if you've seen little tiny salt spoons, they're little tiny metal salt spoons. I've read that back in the day when workers would come and they would, work in mines or in just outdoor spaces, they would come with their plate of food. And then if they worked well enough that day, they would tell them, that's where the saying comes from, he's worth his salt or she's worth her salt. So then they would get their plate and then they would get their individual little dishes with salt in it and their tiny salt spoon, which, because they know that a lot of food, if it's not seasoned properly, oftentimes with salt, it can, it can lack flavor. It cannot be as good as it potentially should be. But all that to say that with this fresh salsa, I think it would still have really good flavor if you're trying to eliminate or reduce salt. If you put even half of the salt in it and taste it there, try it with no salt first, and then add half of the amount of salt. The thing is, it is a tablespoon, but you saw the batch of salsa. It's not like you're consuming the tablespoon with the tiny little jar of salsa. So it's spread across a pretty big amount of salsa. So yeah, I say try it and see how you like it without the salt. So these chiles are already getting nice and toasty. You can see that they're changing from a brighter red to a darker, like a darker red, and they have a nice flavor coming out. When I was looking up the difference between chile de árbol and chile japonés, the one that stands out to me when I taste a salsa made with one over the other, I feel that chile de árbol, this one, has a little bit of a nutty flavor to it. I also really like the way it smells. It has a different smell to it that I love. And I think it's attributed to the little bit of nuttiness. If you're in a rush and you don't have time to do this step, toast, you can just put your chiles directly in the water with your tomatoes, and the salsa is still going to be really good. But also always know that all of these different steps, although they take time, they add a different level of flavor to everything. So just keep that in mind. It's still going to be a good salsa, but this adds another little extra punch to it. Here are these little chiles. I'm going to take them out because it looks like most of them are ready. And they smell divine. One tip, one time I was in Hawaii with my grandma Lola and her mom, my great grandma Mackie, and she always traveled with chiles because she said that they were really expensive in Hawaii because we always needed our salsas no matter where we went. So I don't remember if it was because we had an electric, so I don't remember what the reason was that she didn't toast the chiles on the comal. She had the brilliant idea of putting them in the microwave. Absolutely avoid that at all costs. Don't ever put dried chiles in a microwave because you'll get smoked out of your house. We all had to evacuate the condo because it just was so potent, made everyone start having a cough attack. And that can even happen when you're working with the comal. If the chilies are really potent, people just start coughing too, but we're not doing that many at a time, so we didn't have that issue. My tomatoes are coming to a boil. I usually let them boil for about 3 to 5 minutes max. I think because these are cherry, the skins tend to open up because they're a juicier tomato. But if you find the little grape yellow ones, I haven't tried this one with the regular red grape tomatoes, but I imagine it'll be good because they have a little bit of sweet flavor to them also. Or like I said, tomatillos, the purple tomatillos, all of those will work in this recipe as well. And I'm going to get my blender ready for this one.
Lourdes popped in a question. Do you know the history of Japonés chile?
Japonés chile. I always thought they were from Asia, and I thought Thai chiles were from Asia. I don't know the history, but that was my understanding. I thought that they were from from Asia. And then when I heard that Hungry for History podcast, no, I think they were just different variations of chiles that were originally from Bolivia, made their way to Mexico, and then however, with the Colombian exchange, made their way to Asia. And then because of the climate, because of the way that they're probably planted, all of these chile variations came to be. And yeah, I need to research that because I don't really know why these specific chiles came to be known as chile japonés, chile de árbol, Thai chilies. If they're all originally from the Americas, they're not from Japan.
The only thing I learned about when I was reading about the difference between the two chilies is that Japonés are also known as Hontaka, Santaka, or Oriental style chili peppers. So they have they go by a few different names.
Okay, so in the meantime, I'm just going to be adding this to my jar. This salsa is best fresh. It does keep well, but I don't like to keep it for more than a week. So whenever I make it, if I know I'm not going to use it, I start giving it away to friends and neighbors because I don't know, it's kind of like an agua fresca. They're meant to be consumed when fresh, and they don't, it doesn't, it's not like it goes bad in a week. It just doesn't have the same flavor to me. So I like it best fresh. And you can see it made a whole jar this size, and then it made this whole bowl. So if you know you're cooking for two, I would even cut the recipe maybe into fourths or thirds, because it does yield a lot of salsa, unless you're big on eating salsa and you know you're going to finish it. Okay, so moving on to our next recipe. We have everything ready for this one. The tomatoes are cooked. They're nice and soft. I have my blender right here. I just need my spoon to scoop out the...
What's the shelf life on this salsa, Lola? We got that question.
I love because it's kind of, you know, Tabasco lasts forever, right? Because it's vinegar based. So this one is not Tabasco, obviously it's fresh, but I've had it in my refrigerator sometimes when I make a huge batch and I forget that it's in there for even over a month, and it's still perfectly fine because the vinegar and the salt preserve it. I've made the other tomatillo salsas with cooked tomatillos similar to this that don't have vinegar, and in a couple of weeks they start getting moldy. So the vinegar for sure helps preserve this one. I've from firsthand experience, I've seen how long it lasts because of and it does have a good amount of salt too. Okay, so here's your chiles. I'm just taking off the little tails.
And that's a key difference between the Japonés and the árbol too, right? One has a tail and the other doesn't.
Yes, one has the tail. The árbol has the tail. Japonés doesn't. Árbol is longer and thinner. Yeah. Although I have, depending on the store, most times when I see them sold in packages at the store, that's how they come. Japonés with no tail, with no little bolita, and árbol has it. I put 10. My recipe calls for 5 because most people, people in my family like it with 10, but if I have guests who are not used to eating spicy food, they prefer it with 5. I mean, even with 5, they're like, wow, this has a kick. And I've taught a class before where I had the students add 1 at a time and blend. And even with 1, they're like, oh my gosh, this is enough. I don't need any more spice than one. So like I said, taste as you go. Then I have I don't have my teaspoon, but I'll just use this to measure.
We had a question pop in on why do you take off the tails?
Because you don't want to be biting into a little piece of hard tail when you're eating your salsa. You just want to eat the chili and the tomato. So that's about a tablespoon. And this one I will taste also afterward. Again, if you have another type of vinegar, red wine, apple cider, feel free to use that. I use white distilled for this salsa, but don't run out to the store if you have another type, unless it's like a flavored one. Like I have a saffron flavored one. I wouldn't use that in the salsa because it's going to infuse a flavor, or basil. You don't want to use that. So I just put half of the amount of salt, and then I'm going to taste this. It's usually a tablespoon, but I'm going to start with half of a tablespoon or a teaspoon. Blend. Let me mute you.
While she does that, we'll do our first pop quiz. First person to answer the question in the chat will win a prize from Lola's Mercadito. And the question is, where did chiles originate? Dolores, you were the fastest, but you misspelled the word, so we're gonna have to skip to the right. The person who spelled it correctly, Nora. Woo! Comadre Nora. Yeah, Bolivia. Correct answer.
And I tell you what, since I'm a host, let's pick somebody else.
Then it goes to you, Tish Leon. If you don't mind sending me your email address, and we'll drop the link into Lola's Mercadito for everyone to check out. But anything off the reusable page you can select from. Congratulations, Tish.
Okay. This, all I have to do is taste and see how we are in terms of vinegar and salt. I like mine. No, I think the vinegar is perfect. And I think the salt is perfect. So there was a good thing I didn't use all the salt. And then this one I keep stored in a jar. I like this one because it doesn't make a huge amount. And this is probably my favorite salsa right now. I love it on fried eggs, on my burritos. It just has, I don't know, I think because I like the combination of eggs and vinegar. That's really great. Kind of like how people add Tabasco to eggs. That's that salsa. We made this one in probably 10 minutes, maybe, if that, with very minimal ingredients. So my next salsa and final one is, I'm just gonna get this out of the way. The one that I mentioned earlier that we all make in my family. Kind of like a competition among cousins and people who makes it best, because everyone has their own technique. Some cousins add a little bit of oregano to it, and I have my aunt she's really an excellent cook, but she'll say it's a good salsa, but it's not Grandma Lola's salsa, which is true. Any spins on this are not my grandma's original. So I have my chiles right here, chile japonés. I'm gonna add these to the comal. And while those are getting toasty, with this amount, I think I would recommend maybe using a little spatula or a little something to flip them over, little tongs. Just because there's kind of a lot, you want to get a few at a time. And okay, so like I said, ingredients: chile japonés, garlic cloves, salt, and canned tomato. And then water. I have vivid memories of opening my Grandma Lola's fridge, and she always had this salsa made at home. Hers was a little watery, and she always had it in a pickle jar with no label. And you need kind of a bigger jar for this one because you shake it, you have to shake it to mix everything. And I remember one of my sister-in-law, actually, she makes a really good version of this. Sometimes she'll add, instead of using canned tomatoes, she'll use fresh tomatoes. I don't know if she boils them or roasts them, but that's a good variation on this one as well. But the one thing that we always say you cannot do is blend the chiles with the tomato sauce. What we do is we toast the chiles and then we blend them with water just until they're chopped up enough, not into a creamy. It's not supposed to be creamy like tomato sauce. You still want to see seeds. You still want to see little bits of the chile. And then you add the tomato sauce and you shake it in your jar. Because if you add the water, add the chiles, add the tomato sauce, it's going to be a creamy salsa. And it might have the same exact flavor, but because it doesn't look like my grandma's, whoever tastes it is gonna be like, oh, who made this? Obviously not one of the pros.
Lola,
so-
we had a couple of questions pop in, and this is just some general, these are just some general questions. Do the salsas pair with meats and quesadillas?
Gosh, yes. Oh my gosh. I would say, actually, one of my friends who's on right now, she loved the yellow salsa with quesadillas. I love the red salsa with quesadillas. I love the red salsa with just a grilled steak. This week I still have some of my yellow one in the fridge that I made earlier this week, and I loved it with milanesa, chicken milanesa. It's so good because yeah, whenever I have meat, chicken, anything, I always have to have a salsa as a side, and it pairs well with so many, yeah, quesadillas, like I said, eggs, burritos. Whenever my sister's in town, we literally take a little jar of salsa everywhere to eat because not very many places have good salsas around here. Okay, so these chiles are nice and toasty. Go ahead.
Oh, was there no need to cool off that last batch of chile before you jarred it?
No, because the jar is, I mean, it can cool in the jar. I probably would leave it, I usually would leave them open until they cool completely. But no need to, I mean, it's a thick enough jar where it's not gonna affect, it's not gonna crack the jar or anything. Okay, so the next step for this one, I already rinsed out my other blender, is to blend. First, I'm going to get my garlic, because it's 2 cloves of garlic. You can toast them if you want, but that's not my grandma's recipe. And then you're gonna add these to the blender with your chiles.
And when you go through your blending technique, if you can repeat it again, we got a question on how do you blend?
Okay, I'm gonna show you right now. The first step is to blend your chiles with water, not with tomato sauce. You're not ever gonna blend your chiles with the tomato sauce. Most salsas, you're gonna blend the chiles with tomatillos, with tomatoes, with the little yellow tomatoes like the one I made. But for this one, it will affect the texture just because the sauce is already creamy. You know, it's nice and smooth. And you don't want you want your salsas to still have a little bit of texture, and you want it to show the seeds. If you put it on, especially in this blender, if you put it on high, it's gonna just turn into a cream and it's gonna look like tomato sauce. Okay, so I'm gonna show you what I do first. Water. I'm gonna start with half of a cup. So you see, it's the chiles, the garlic, and the water. And I'm gonna blend it low because you want the chiles to stay in, to get in, broken up into smaller chunks, but not pulverized completely. Let me mute myself.
While she mutes, we'll do our second question for a prize. First person to put in the answer will be our winner. True or false? The chiles japoneses generally have a tail. Dolores, you won again. You're too quick. Someone says if you have the question, the answer already pre-typed out.
Okay, so you're gonna see, you can see here, the salsas, you can still see seeds. You can see that it's watery from the water. So at this point is where, yeah, it looks great. I'm just gonna add the salt. This has about a teaspoon, but we're gonna taste that after. And I'm gonna blend for just a second just to get that salt in. That's it. And then this is, so like you saw, that's the main tip. Don't blend it with the tomato sauce. And now, oh wow, there's a lot of seeds in here. I'm just gonna set this aside. I'm gonna pour this mixture, which doesn't look like a lot, doesn't look like it would be potent, doesn't look like it would be spicy, but trust me, it is. Add that to your jar. your pickle jar, like my grandma. I'm gonna add half of this this is for 8 ounces of tomato sauce. I'm gonna start with that. And then a little bit more water. Because my grandma's was kind of watery. The one tip my aunt and grandma will always say is to, with the lowest trickle of water in the sink, just go around your blender to rinse it out and get the rest of the little seeds. And that's what you're gonna add to your, ran out. Let me get.
Can you give us a rough ratio? So the chili concentrate to the tomato sauce to the water, just general, because I know it's kind of al gusto.
Generally, it's about 20. Okay, so I'll give you the exact. It's my aunts, my grandmas, they never really gave exact amounts, but I have made this a few times, and I use about 40 chiles, and then about a cup to a cup and a half of water, and 4 ounces, which is the smallest can of tomato sauce, 4 to 8 ounces. So no, the smallest can is 8 ounces. So I'm starting with half of it. And we can add more if we want. So I'm just gonna get a spatula to scoop this out real quick.
And Lola, as you grab that, we had a couple of questions about, have you ever heard of chile piquin? And how does that kind of compare to what we're cooking with?
Oh, chile piquin, yeah, I love chile piquin. It's super spicy, tiny, a little tiny ball chile, about the size of a, gosh, what is it? Smaller than a cranberry, smaller than the size of a, if you know what, like a allspice berry, bigger than a ball of peppercorn, but not the size of a cranberry. So not as big as a blueberry, smaller than a blueberry, and it's extremely potent. One time I was in Oaxaca and a friend made me pozole, and they were all just breaking the chile piquin into their pozole, or eating it, the little ball one at a time. And I thought it was cool because I ate chile, and oh my gosh, I felt like I was gonna die when I tasted it. So they're spicier than these. If you're cooking with them, you can probably use them interchangeably in either of these red salsa, the red or the yellow salsa recipe, but just know that it's gonna be a spicier little chile, so you don't need as many. And I've heard a lot of people use it for aguachile too, to blend into their lemon juice. So you see that little last step got the rest of the little seeds and stuff, which you want in your salsa. And yeah, this is, let me see, I'm gonna mix first to see. I just need my lid real quick. Oh, here it is. So you shake this. And this came out darker than what my grandma's color usually. Hers is a little bit brighter of a red, but because I toasted my chiles a little longer, they got darker. I think the texture is good. If you wanted to add the rest of your tomato sauce because you didn't want it to go bad, that's fine too. I'm just gonna taste this one too. I think it's really good. I would just add about a teaspoon more of salt because it is meant to be a little bit, it should have a little kick from salt. But I'll always remember too, when you're serving your salsa, think about how you're going to serve it. If you're going to serve it with really salty corn tortilla chips, like the ones that they sell at the grocery stores, you don't need to add that much salt. But if it's going to go over a piece of meat that, you know, is lightly seasoned, then you want it to have a good amount of salt.
We had a question come in, and it's totally relevant to this salsa as much as all the other ones. If you make it too spicy, what's a way to fix that?
It's kind of like when you over salt, it's hard to fix that. So my recommendation, like I said, start with fewer chiles from the beginning so that you don't do that. Because adding water to it or adding tomato sauce is gonna, you can botch your salsa. So instead of using all the chiles, the other thing too is your salsas can taste, like I said in the beginning, they can taste really, really strong and hot when right when you blend them. But after they sit in the refrigerator, I don't know if it's just because they've had time to settle or if they've cooled in the refrigerator, literally temperature-wise. When you taste it afterward, it's not as spicy. Or also when you taste it with something else, when you're tasting it with chips or on top of something else and it's being consumed not directly with a spoon, then it loses its potency. So just always keep that in mind. It might seem like it's too spicy and you're not gonna be able to handle it, but depending on how you serve it, it can still be great, even if it tastes a little too spicy right off the bat. So here are your 3 salsas. This one lasts, I would say, a good 2 weeks. Whenever you're storing them, you want to store them. I would put this in a smaller jar. Always, the way you'll know a salsa is going bad is you open the lid, there's mold on the lid, or there's mold around the edges of the top of your salsa. Get rid of it if that's the case. But yeah, this one will last a good 2 weeks. This one, at least a month. And then your green salsa, you definitely want to consume within a week. So any other questions? These are all your 3 salsas. The one technique we didn't do is roasting. But even the guacamole salsa or the tomato one that I made with the yellow tomatoes, if you like that more smoky flavor or charred, you can always either put your tomatillos or tomatoes directly on a comal or on a tray in your oven and broil them, but keep an eye because the broiler can get super hot and burn your stuff. Or one of the techniques I like is just putting my tomatoes or my chiles directly on, if you have a gas burning stove, directly onto the flame and just twist, move them around before they start exploding. Or on a grill outside. That's a great way to do larger amounts of roasting outside. So you saw we toasted the dried chiles on my comal, and we boiled some of the ingredients to make this salsa. We just didn't get to roast today. That would have been the third technique of making some of the really delicious salsas and sauces that are loved throughout the US and Mexico. Salsa, I believe, I can't remember the stats, it's one of the top selling condiments. I can't remember if it's second to ketchup or if it's surpassed ketchup, which is amazing. I mean, it's fascinating to hear that given the country that we live in and just people's eating techniques. Mexican food is among one of the most beloved foods in the US. So yeah, if you can learn any one of these salsas and just make it your signature salsa, trust me, you'll be a hit at the parties. My brother-in-law learned the guacamole salsa and he loves making it. I feel like he's new to cooking, and just learning this one salsa and learning to make it really well it's just a confidence booster, because people, they echan porras, they tell you how good it is, and it kind of strokes your ego when you make a good salsa.
Well, Comadre Lola, it has been a real pleasure to learn these 3 salsas, and to learn a little bit about the history, as was mentioned in some of these, because that history always adds a little bit of spice to our making the salsa. We're extremely grateful to you, and Elise, you've been absolutely marvelous doing all your little work behind the scenes there and reading the questions and coming up with some great questions for our quiz. We're very, very grateful. And I think maybe you want to talk a little bit about the mercado.
Oh, so whoever went, the prize winners, did you already pick some winners, Elise?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So then what you're going to do is you're going to email me and I'll let you know how you can claim your prize, Lola at Lola's Cocina. Pretty much you have free reign. You can pick whatever you want from the shop. I'll just give you your budget via email.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Comadre Maria?
Hi, sorry. Did you want me to talk about Jeannie's?
Yes, please.
Hi, everyone. Hang on a second. Let me put myself on. Hi, welcome. Thank you for being here tonight. As Nora said, our next event is Las Comadres Presents Mind, Body, and Spirit. Jeannie Diaz, who's helping us host that program, is going to be talking to Michelle Rodriguez, and they're going to be talking about the breathing meditation. And you feel like you know how to breathe, but this is like something a little bit more than just taking a breath. So we're very excited about that. And that's going to be Wednesday, October 4th, I think. But we will send out an email so that everyone is aware and everybody can sign up. And we're just so excited to have you all here. And just so you know, this is, Lola and Las Comadres Kitchen and Jeannie's yoga program. It's all part of our celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. So we're starting our celebration early, and we're starting it correctly with, cooked chiles and lots of salsas. So we love it. Thank you, Lola.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you,
I believe
everyone.
Comadres will be sending the links to each of these recipes in a follow-up email.
Absolutely. And we've taped the show, and it'll be on our YouTube channel by the end of the week.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you,
Bye.
Lola.
As
for
much
a
as-
Good night,
wonderful
everyone.
program. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.